Welcome, and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Dr. Susan Gregurick, the Associate Director for Data Science and Director of the Office of Data Science Strategy at the National Institutes of Health. Susan, thanks for joining me. I think we're going to have a great conversation here. And just to tee things up here, because data is very much a thing that we worry about, day in and day out. It's the fabric of NIH and so many other federal agencies that we follow here. And the cloud is kind of the foundation of it all in the end here. So just to get the conversation started here, just tell me, how is NIH improving that data access and that data analysis? It seems like everyone wants all the data all the time these days.
Oh, that is such a great question. And I'm so thrilled to be here today and to talk with you. It's wonderful. I think we are going to have a great conversation. And you're right, cloud has really democratized data, democratize our access to data, and really improve the way in which researchers can work with data. So data access, this is something that I've been working on for a while and really thinking about. So I want to tell you what it's like now, starting at the beginning. And to do that, I have to tell you a little bit about how researchers access data right now, independent of the cloud, but just how the process works. So we utilize many different systems, but one of the main systems we use is at the NLM NCBI. It's called dbGaP. It stands for a database of genotypes and phenotypes. What happens when a researcher, a clinical researcher, is doing a study that, for example, involves human participants, or they will register that study, tell a little bit about what that kind of study is, what kind of experiments are going on, and most importantly, they tell about the kinds of data that they're going to generate and where that data might be going. So all of that information, study registration, we call it, goes into dbGaP. After the study is concluded and the researcher makes the data available, wherever that may be, a secondary researcher can search dbGaP either through text or through pull-down menus and find that data. And then they can request access to that data. So the request goes to NIH primarily through a data access committee. And once approved, then the researcher can get access. So that's generally the process of how researchers can get access to controlled access data. And that's an important thing to understand because there's a lot of inefficiencies there. There's a lot of ways in which we can improve that. Some of the things that we're doing now to improve data access is to think about automation. Automation plays a big role in many of our IT infrastructure and capabilities. So we're looking at ways in which we can improve efficiencies and automate just that process of requesting, having that request reviewed through NIH, and then getting approvals. So the cloud will play an important role in that because many of these data are now being housed in different types of data platforms on the cloud. And so linking that automated process to the cloud is really the next big step. And this is something that we're going to start at the end of this fiscal year. So we run on the fiscal years, you probably know, and then really ramp up in 2023 and beyond. And what we hope to do is to improve that process. Right now, it's on average about 2 weeks or more for a researcher to request access to data, then to get the data. We'd like to make that near to real-time access, at least within a 24-hour turnaround. And I think we can do it. I really do. We've done a lot already, but just making that near to real-time data access is a priority. Leveraging the cloud, leveraging cloud infrastructure is another way to do that. So thanks for asking, and I hope that you can work more and learn a little bit more about dbGaP and all of the other ways in which we allow researchers to have access to data.
Mm-hmm. You teed up just so many great topics that we're going to dive into more here. And since you brought it up, let's get into the automation piece of things.
Yeah.
You said that next fiscal year is going to be a pretty exciting one, and that near real-time access, I think, a lot of people in the research community are going to be very excited about that part of things. Can you go into a little bit more depth of how the automation is going to be that force multiplier and make sure that you're going from the 2 weeks to the near real time?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's another component of this that we have been piloting for at least 2 years, and now it's actually much more in what we would call production mode. And that's called Researcher Auth Services, or we just call it RAS, but it's really a way for researchers to essentially have a single sign-on process across all of our NIH platforms. So it's hard to tell you how many different ways in which researchers can access data, work with analytics in the cloud, but there are at least 20 or more cloud-based data platforms that house data. Much of it is controlled access data because it's coming from participants of studies. What we want to do is just to make it much more easier that once the researcher has the approval to get the data, that they can actually get the data through an authentication authorization process. So the RAS system is essentially a single sign-on system. Researchers can sign on once and then, in principle, get access to data across all of the systems that are going to participate in this RAS architecture. There are at least now 16 different platforms that are part of this authentication process. Ideally, going forward, and that part is what we've been working on for the past 2 years, going forward, what we would like to do is to not only allow single sign-on, but to make it possible for researchers to then get authentication and authorization for the data across our systems so that they can aggregate and pull data into one analysis platform and then do the analysis. And probably I'll tell you in a little bit more about interoperability and creating that fabric, that researcher data mesh that is so important for really taking all the different ways that data can be siloed. Even if it's in the cloud, it doesn't mean that it's all there and accessible. There's many different platforms within the cloud, but creating that sort of data mesh across the cloud is the next big challenge, not just for federal agencies, but it's also happening in industry. Netflix, for example, is really big in creating infrastructure that relies on data mesh technologies.
We'll get into that in a second here. But something that came to my mind as you were saying all of that is that, at agencies like NIH, it really is just this, embarrassment of riches when it comes to the data. The problem's never not enough data. There's tons of it.
There's tons.
And you have to your point about the accessibility side of things, you have to find the right data at the right time, at the right place.
Exactly.
And so help me understand how that happens, because, it can be, you could spend a lifetime searching for some of this data if you're doing it manually.
Yeah, absolutely. So data discovery, that is definitely a big challenge. If you think about all the amount of data that researchers are creating that might be available for additional discovery, there's at least 173 petabytes of biomedical data on our Strides cloud providers. So that's what we can count. It's an unnumber of petabytes, maybe even exabytes of data that's in the world, generated from biomedical research, going into repositories that are either from community-driven repositories. I'm pretty familiar as coming from a structural biology community of the Protein Data Bank. There's also GEO. There's plenty of wonderful data repositories. There's also generalist repositories, Zenodo, Figshare, Dryad. So there's just so many ways in which we have data, but actually finding it, as you said, is a real challenge. So one of the things we did just this past January is that we held a workshop on data discovery. We asked 3 important questions to the research community. How can you discover data across a wide field of repositories, such as the generalist or the community-driven repositories? How can you do deep data search for cohort discovery? How can we build and collect data on participants that might have comorbidities, for example? So you really have to do a deep data search for cohort discovery. And then how can we build out complicated information or analysis from a search that combines data and information and algorithms? So a much more knowledge graph type of approach. So that was a wonderful and very enlightening workshop. We're now starting to pilot a few things. So one of the systems that we have at NIH is called BRIC. It's really many different but connected data platforms that work on, for example, traumatic brain injury or eye disease or rare diseases. So one of the things that we're doing is we're building just a general data discovery across the BRIC system using semantic technologies. Another thing that we're doing is we're leveraging something from industry called fast healthcare interoperable resources. It's a way, you probably know this, it's a way to map electronic healthcare and related information into sort of a standard format or standards. We are taking those that FHIR resource, those FHIR capabilities, and using that to actually build cohort discovery. So we'll be exploring that even more, trying to map more clinically related data into the FHIR standards. This is not easy, but we'll be doing that so that we can enhance our discovery of cohorts. And then there's a lot of exciting activities happening at NSF on building knowledge graphs. So, partnering with them in the Open Knowledge Network is a possibility. There's some wonderful work that's happening at our NCANS Institute, the National Center for Advanced Translational Research, on the biodata translator that is building a very sophisticated knowledge graph to bring in data across those open data repositories so that you can query and ask questions and be able to pull in information and data from that work. So I think that there's a lot of exciting but very new ideas, and we'd like to explore that further and essentially enhance data discovery along at least those three domains: data discovery generally, cohort building specifically, and then advanced technologies for complicated information and knowledge retrieval.
Well, I think what's great about that is that you at NIH are never wondering what the researcher, the end user, needs or wants from that data, because they will tell you, it seems.
Oh, yes.
The feedback is very bidirectional. It seems that there is this open channel of here's what we like, here's what we'd like to see different, here's the changes that we want, and that you guys are very responsive to that. I think that's a great back and forth.
Absolutely. Research and working in the federal space really does hinge on that open communication with the research community and them with us. So we try to understand each other. We're both trying to push the boundaries of science, us from the federal side, and of course them from the research and scientific inquiry side. And it's been a wonderful partnership. I'm so very thankful for all the researchers who work with us, either through addressing our request for informations or through attending our workshops. Or sometimes they just call us or send us emails, and our job is to listen and we're public servants and to be available. So I hope that I can encourage folks to continue those forms of dialogues.
That's great to hear. To pivot the conversation for a moment, we were speaking earlier about how the cloud is a fantastic enabler of the automation that we're going to see shortly. It also seems to be a great facilitator of kind of knocking down these data silos, right? That it's going to be not discrete systems here or there or everywhere. That is going to kind of pull things together in a way that is very helpful. And so, can you tell me a little bit more about how that's kind of a game changer for NIH?
It's been a fascinating game changer. It really has. I mean, it indeed has not only made it possible for us to talk about data, but to really and realistically share data, as well as to enable collaborations. So some of the things that have been really fascinating for me is thinking about ways to break down data silos across NIH and across the federal agency. So I sort of hinted that we've been working on interoperability of data platforms, and that's something that we're pushing forward aggressively this year. We have at least 20 different NIH-supported data platforms, and they're all wonderful. They fill a mission for an institute or center. For example, there's the NHLBI Biodata Catalyst working with heart and lung data. TopMed is an important precision medicine database that is in Biodata Catalyst, as well as others, including some pretty exciting work from our long COVID or Recover program. There's the NHGRI Anvil. It's the GTEx data, genomic and genotype data. There's the Cancer Research Data Commons that holds many different types of cancer research. All of these are really important platforms, but they're all sort of silos in some way. Our goal is to break down that capability to build interconnections where it makes sense. So creating a data fabric or a data mesh that basically is the few capabilities or applications that will enhance researchers to be able to work across those platforms. So one of the things that we've been doing is, of course, implementing our research auth services, but going beyond that, working with standard communities such as GA4GH on data discovery. We've been able to make it possible, and this is still a bit of a pilot, for researchers to, for example, in pediatric cardiology, to build a cohort of children who are controls for pediatric cancer in terms of genomics, and then build a test set of data across the Cancer Research Data Commons, the Gabrielle Miller Kids First Data Platform, and the Biodata Catalyst, and study what are some of the biomarkers for pediatric cardiac heart disease. And the really fascinating thing about this is that researchers were able to find the data across 3 different platforms, aggregate it in such a way, and then do analysis in one platform without ever having to copy and move the data. And that is facilitated because all this data is in the cloud. You can't do that sort of data mesh or that interoperability as easily if you're not on the cloud. I'm sure that we could do it in a hybrid computing environment, but it's so much more accessible and easier if you have a single sign-on, a way to authenticate across multiple platforms, authorize the data across multiple platforms, and then a way to pull that data and aggregate it and do analysis without ever having to copy it. The cloud is perfect for that, and it's been wonderful to see this small field start to bloom. And I think going forward, this really does point to a way to think about data science in the future. Think about allowing researchers and institutes to build the platforms that are necessary for their missions, but also connect to larger systems in a very economic and facile way.
What's so interesting, and I think NIH is a great case study of this, is that there's of course that need for data sharing. Health research is collaborative by nature. You need a big tent of people poring over the data, coming up with these breakthroughs. At the same time, this is sensitive information, and there's the right protections there, and that's a culture that NIH has it within its DNA, really. And so I always think that's a tricky balance to manage, the ease of access and the security side of things. And then I would suspect that the cloud kind of helps facilitate those things. But tell me a little bit more of how the cloud can enable that secure access to data.
Absolutely. So we're really working to enhance our security profile. One of the things that makes it easier to have those security profiles is the fact that many of our cloud providers are FedRAMP moderate, which we do need. Mm-hmm. We do need to have security systems in place that are have an ATO and authority to operate and are FedRAMP moderate. Piggybacking off of what the cloud service providers have, it makes it so much easier for researchers to actually be compliant with the security requirements. And that means that we can stand up and work with researchers across many different institutions. It doesn't have to be just a select few. They can leverage the cloud for their platforms. We are working with Idea State institutions to stand up a sort of a cloud lab so that they can have a way to share and access their data in a cloud environment with the help, and I really have to thank Google, by the way, with the help of Google engineers providing the security support and also some of the technical requirements so that researchers from institutions that are underrepresented or do not have a lot of funding can actually really do advanced data science. And this is one of the benefits of having these cloud service providers working with academics and working with federal agencies.
All right. Well, that's great to hear that it is such a broad community working together very collaboratively, and that the cloud is kind of the bones that holds it all together.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about how the cloud can help knock down some of these data silos and give NIH a bigger picture of what it has and get it to people quickly. But I imagine that is an important piece of the puzzle, but not the only piece of the puzzle. That there's some stuff that NIH can do in terms of like data inventories is something we hear from a lot of CDO shops. I'm just kind of curious, what's the current state of play of that over at NIH in terms of doing that important data inventory effort?
Yeah, that's also a great question because there's so much data.
Can't be overstated how much data there is.
Yeah, and so just making it possible for researchers to just find and access the data. One of the exciting things that we just did, actually, this really is from maybe June, is we've partnered with DataCite And DataCite is an organization that allows researchers and repositories and those who are running repositories to mint data identifiers, DOIs, for data sets that are in repositories. Those data sets are then indexed and they're searchable, not only on DataCite, but in other ways. That is just one of the small ways in which we're trying to create facile ability for researchers to find and access and then cite the data. That's equally as important as using the data as citing it for credit for all. So our partnership with DataCite, it's new. It's a pilot this year. I think it's going to be a fantastic partnership. But what we really want to do that does align with our data management sharing policy is to make it possible so that when researchers do share their data, as they will need to according to the policy, they will also get credit for sharing the data. Other researchers will be able to find it through partnerships like the partnership we have with DataCite.
That's great to hear. It just seems like, again, it really connects back to all of the things we've been talking about in terms of, making sure the data is searchable, findable, accessible, all those great things, and that, everyone is in on the loop in terms of that collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a really fun experience so far, but it hasn't always been easy.
No, it sounds like, a lot of these things have been, in some cases years in the making. And,
yes.
Case in point, it seems like some of these things have been fairly new. The what you just said as far as the example of this just happening in June. So
exactly.
Fast moving things, but it seems like the NIH is really staying on top of it all.
We are, and I have to say, first of all, thanks to my small team who work in my office with me, who really make all the magic happen. But we work across NIH, all of the 27 institutes and centers. So in reality, there are more than 200 people that work with us. Some of us very closely. They co-chair working groups. They push out things like the Cloud Interoperability Platform Initiative is really a collaboration with a number of people across institutes. If we didn't have this backbone of folks at NIH who are really interested and passionate about data science, I'm not sure we would have been able to accomplish even half of what we've done. So it's really, it does take a village, quite truly, but it also takes a commitment from a lot of folks on the ground really pushing forward. And even those small little ripples really do make a tidal wave of data science.
Well, that passion and that enthusiasm really makes a difference. We'll get into much more of this, and thanks again for joining us for part one of our conversation with Dr. Susan Gregurick, the Associate Director for Data Science and Director of the Office of Data Science Strategy over at NIH. We're going to present part two of our NIH discussion after we get an industry perspective. Now, let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cloud Exchange.